According to many of us, not just myself, but you and many other Sanders volunteers and surrogates and staffers, the Sanders campaign was primarily run, at least at the very top, by high-paid mercenary establishment, political consultant types. And this entire time, it was difficult for people to know this, and they didn't want to come out with the stuff. One, you had a contract you couldn't violate. Two, there was also a lot of fear that it would hurt Bernie Sanders and the campaign. We didn't want to bring any more negativity into the campaign. And one of the things I want to show the first part of this thread, because it's a giant thread. We're not going to go over the whole thing. You guys can read it for yourself, but it is on my Twitter. And one of the things I want to start by showing is Scott Dakota's comments. Now, Scott is an organizer I've known about for about 5 years. He's a burner, OG burner. And he talks about the gigantic grassroots activist organizer army that were the actual strength of the campaign had they been utilized, had been holding their tongues about being systemically mistreated, abused, and pushed away by the official campaign staff. And he goes on to say also that organizers weren't telling these stories in public in real time for fear it would hurt Bernie's chances of winning, even despite the increasing fear that the campaign was being deliberately hobbled and sabotaged from the inside. But now it's over, and the held back stories are now starting to emerge into a trickle, and it's likely this trickle will turn into a flood in coming weeks. If you have a story to tell, now is the time. If you want to collate stories and make sense of why things went so tragically wrong, keep an ear out and start doing your research. A lot of professional mercenary consultants in the Sanders campaign spent their time with their eyes primarily on lining up their next big money gigs after their anticipated or perhaps planned failure of the Sanders campaign. Some of those people are now landing with Team Biden or the DNC or general establishment Dem Party gravy train gig pool, or are starting up new consulting and media services for hire or super PACs, and we're going to talk about that later. Keep an eye out for who lands with their feet up, big money post Sanders Consulting, and who ends up in favor with the corporate Dem establishment. That will tell you just who was in it to cash in on the movement and why, and who was not in it for the values and ideals of the progressive movement. And finally, I just want to point out one of the people I do know, Meg Lay. She said her experience with the Bernie 20 campaign was awful. I felt used, belittled, and alienated. I know I'm not the only one who had bad experiences with the campaign. I didn't speak up about my experience because I didn't want it to hurt Bernie's chance of being our nominee. Now that the campaign has been suspended, we should have transparency and talk about what went wrong so progressives can learn from the problems we had. So, Melissa, let's just start by, I'm sure you have a lot to say. I just want to start by talking about your experience in the LA campaign as a field organizer, and specifically related to your direct higher up, which was, I believe, Lewis Myers.
Yeah, that's all really interesting how people, have had the same or similar negative experiences with the campaigns from across the country. And specifically, I can obviously just speak for Los Angeles, but I agree with Meg in that it is high time that we are able to speak out and let people know what an oppressive space that was to work in. Again, now everything I'm saying is pretty much just from my perspective, but my hope is that we can, like she said, learn from these things, keep an eye out for people, and if they're all about getting jobs now, I feel like anybody who is going to be working under them needs to be fully aware of what it's like, and anybody who's going to be hiring them needs to be fully aware of their management, their decisions, their lack of organization, etc. They always dangled, even before we got hired, they dangled jobs in front of us, like you have to kind of not kiss ass, but you're obviously not going to be able to come out and speak out about what's going on, because they wanted to be, once they were employed, they wanted to go to get redeployed and go further and go to the next state. So there was just a hush around the office in terms of speaking out if people had indeed wanted to speak out. Now, some people also were brought in by these mercenaries, as was described, from previous jobs. And, you know, some of us were like, where do these people come from? Are they progressive? It just doesn't matter. There's a disconnect between Bernie activists and organizers and progressive organizers on the ground in the LA area with the kind of the ones that organize for unions or politicians and have that whole experience. And that's who they picked for our bosses, so to speak. And so they started hiring in June. And then I don't know what went on other than, you know, the grassroots activists like Carlos and Michelle, and they were like bringing these kind of outsiders to the Bernie circles to us and meeting, like introducing everybody. And there was one big meeting at Philippe's, I remember, and it was kind of like, you know, an intro. And then we waited to be called on and tried to, you know, I was ecstatic that they were finally here. And I thought, oh, great, we're going to be, you know, there's going to be a grand organizational scheme, and I'm going to be helping doing because that's what I did before as a super volunteer in 2016. I was a super volunteer. So I was like, yeah, I got that experience. I could run a barnstorm, you know, run volunteer, run canvas, phone banks, and whatever is needed. Well, there was really no movement. I mean, it was just like stagnation from June, July, August, September, October. Finally, one office got opened up. Especially Lewis and others would pay lip service to the grassroots.
Right.
And I think it was around the time there was a letter from the grassroots,
right?
You know, that came out.
Let's show this letter really quick, a little bit. I'm not going to read all of it. I just want to show you can show the whole thing, but I'm going to read a little bit of it, of the first part. And this letter was, as Melissa stated, from all of the grassroots in California, not just the people that were really in it or that were trying to get hired, but this is everybody. And this letter was sent supposedly directly all the way up to Bernie Sanders. It was sent to all of the higher ups, Jade, everybody. And we really don't know what happened. Like, nothing happened as a result of this letter. It was signed by a lot of people here in the community, and it says, "We regret the need for this letter. However, the time has come to address some issues within the California Bernie Sanders campaign with seriousness of purpose. We are the California grassroots. We are the boots on the ground, building the movement for issues such as Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and solutions to homelessness, failing infrastructure, and money in politics. We are the people who fought long and hard for Senator Sanders in 2015 and 2016, and we continued the work after the election. That election was over. At the local, state, and national levels, we founded Bernie groups all over the state and the country and organized them at lightning speed. We are delegates, organizers, and community leaders, many who have run for public office and party leadership and continue to do so. And then we have stuck by the senator's side through thick and thin. And when early 2019 came around, we readied our movement to show up and make sure that this time we would win California in a landslide, take the nomination, and go on to defeat Trump. And then they talk about the coalition, the enthusiasm. And then they go on to talk about how the concerns, our concern led to conversations. And those conversations among community leaders have led to this letter. The concerns we have are many, and chief among them we have listed here. Disconnect from the grassroots is one of them. And they go on to talk about the disconnect from the grassroots and the behavior of some organizers against some volunteers.
We weren't allowed as organizers to, and the exact word that I got in a text message is associate with. And associate with, this was in reference to the Grassroots Highland Park office that I worked with. There was this grand kind of blanket decision made that every grassroots group club, person, people, group of people was considered an independent expenditure and an IE. And so every time there was someone from Grassroots, the Grassroots, that wanted to participate and help out and be there and help us and do things, we were barred from working with them. Well, I know you did a show, you had a poll worker who was in training come on. I was like, oh my God, because I'm on the field and I see what's happening. And I was extremely concerned about the vote for Bernie. After all the work we're doing on the ground, for it to just blow up on one single day because of this election integrity stuff, that is definitely a problem. So even I tried to let them know, like, this is going to be bad, and I wanted to alert people, like, shouldn't we be concerned about this?
In a KDEM delegate group, you said, so in LA County, if anyone has recently changed their party preference or had it accidentally changed, they have to bring an ID. If not, their vote is provisional. Does that sound kosher? And then somebody said, one of the regional field directors said, Melissa, here is the message I got from Bernie staff. They prefer staff to be careful and avoid spreading rumors about voting. So someone had taken a screen cap of your Facebook comment.
That was one of the few groups I was still in. I wasn't active because very early on, we had a very long talking to from Lewis that we need to scrub all our media. We have to leave all our groups. People were freaking out. We needed to go back in time and clean up everything about what we've said about any other candidate in the past. So rather than just look into it, that is not what happened. It was about quashing everything and the whole, we've got it. You guys stay in your place, which was the whole attitude the whole time. Yeah. You stay in your lane, you focus on this, always re-diverting to, oh, we need to win. Oh, we need to have the eye on the prize. That's what Shelley Jackson told us at the Bakersfield retreat. The whole organizing staff of California for Bernie was there, and we were extremely concerned about what's going to happen on voting day, because in our experience, it didn't go down well last time. Provisional ballots were handed out like candy for no reason. And we want to make sure that's not going to happen again. Forget if it's Jarrell or Rafa or someone, one of them, basically called us. No, I think it was Jarrell. This is a conspiracy theory, what happened last time. You guys are all worried about nothing. Basically calm down. Then I remember Shelley Jackson running from the back of the room. We brought it up again the next day. And she's like, everybody, we've got lawyers for this. Eye on the prize. Don't worry about it. We got it. And they fucking did not have it. Lewis Myers was the ones that ran that office. And he fostered the most hostile work environment I have ever in my whole life worked in. He was verbally abusive. One of the RFDs under him threatened to quit if he didn't stop what he was, the verbal abuse and attacks. Some of them were private. Some of them were very public, as I will tell you right now. I had to file a union complaint against him. I don't know where that went, but it was a really difficult place to work. Mm-hmm. So one day he came out of the office screaming, out of his private office screaming. He made everybody get off the phones immediately. And he came right over to me, stood right in front of me and said, get off the phone, screaming and yelling at me. And so I got off the phone and I was phone banking like I was supposed to. And he basically started yelling at one of the regional field directors and saying, how come your people aren't making calls and all this stuff. And it was very embarrassing. I was shaking because I have no idea why he was picking on me. But that's what he was doing. And he said some terrible things to the regional field director that really did not deserve it. And it made my stomach just turn. And so Daniel Andelon was sitting in the room, his supervisor. And by the way, so were volunteers. Volunteers saw this. This is no way to treat staff. At all. This was a rage. He was raging. And so his supervisor, direct supervisor and friend, who brought Lewis into this whole thing, was sitting there, and I tried to talk to Danny afterwards. He evaded me 3 times. I went up to him, can we talk? Can we talk? Finally, a couple days later, he casually asked me, oh, didn't you want to talk? I was like, yeah, sure, let's talk. And I told Danny to keep Lewis the fuck away from me, the fuck away from any of my coworkers. If he ever fucking does that again, I would not guarantee what I would or would not do. So yeah, this was just not acceptable behavior. And so that kind of like atmosphere of work, going in and day out, you never know what that guy was going to do, who he was going to be raging against. And and also most of us asked each other, when do we actually get to do our real work? Because as organized, I thought I was paid as an organizer to actually organize, and I did, but I had to literally do that on the side when Lewis wouldn't know. I mean, for some reason, everything was like a knee-jerk reaction. First he was getting us into the mode of actual organizing and building out and so on. But then as we were started to do that whole thing got changed. Now, I don't know if that was Lewis's decision or the higher ups or whatever. Right. But then we had to shift, and we just basically became professional phone bankers just for specific special prioritized events, like 3 events in the week or whatever, and that's it. But not for my district. I wasn't really allowed to build out in my district.
You built your district out on your own time?
Yes.
The strategy was you couldn't speak about any other candidate, and initially we understood this. Everybody understood it as, okay, that's Bernie Sanders. He doesn't want to speak ill of other candidates, but it came back to bite him. Because we see a lot of people wanted differences between him and Biden, wanted differences between him and Warren. The Bernie Sanders campaign is the campaign that had the most volunteers, outraised everybody in money except Donald Trump, obviously, and had all this money, all these people, all this energy. And yet there were times, Melissa, when you guys did not have simple materials, simple leaflets to hand out. And you didn't have them for weeks. Can you tell me more about that? There's a picture here of the UPS guy who had supposedly, what happened? They missed the delivery?
I don't know, but all I remember is when we needed more materials and brochures because we were canvassing. And when we go to a canvas, or when volunteers are canvassing and going door to door, we're supposed to leave something at the door to show that Bernie was there. In mid-January, I remember that was the first instance where we ran out in the LA office. We ran out of Spanish materials. So I remember we having to kind of bargain with other field organizers from other areas like Riverside, or I forget where we got the Spanish stuff. But we were like, oh, here, we'll give you some. I think it was from Northern California. We got a box of Spanish literature for us, just one, and so we split it up amongst a few of us. But we're waiting, and so when I asked questions like, where's the Spanish lit? And by the way, 2 weeks later, approximately, I think it was 2 weeks later, and we need it for the weekends because obviously that was the big push for canvassing. Yeah. Then we ran out of English materials, and there were we ran out of the generic English ones, and then there were the other specialized like labor ones or the student ones, but the ones that we were supposed to be giving out, we didn't have. So we had to make do. But then, and when I asked questions like, why don't we have the materials?
We have that right here. It seemed that you were gaslit. You said, what's the reason? This wasn't the first time you asked. I mean, this is after you asking several times.
Right. I finally had to put it in a group chat so other people could possibly respond. Maybe they had a clue about why we weren't getting materials. And I wasn't accusing anybody, but of course they took it as me accusing somebody. But and you know what I thought was astounding to me was that we weren't like we were always being held accountable. They wanted to know how many volunteers we had, the names of everybody, how many phone calls we made, how many phone calls the volunteers made, and so on and so on. Lewis needed that for whatever reason, to show off, essentially, I think.
Right.
In any case, we were always held accountable. When I was sick, I was sick for a little bit. I was working from home. I had to account for everything that I did at home while I was working. And when I did account for all of that, I made a list. I sent out emails for 500 people, blah, blah, blah. I did all this stuff. Then I had my lunch, et cetera, et cetera. The response I got back was pretty much that doesn't count, because really the only thing that counted is what he wanted us all to be doing, which is phone calling. But in any case, when I asked the question about why is this happening, you know, the people that he brought on basically started piling on to me and saying, you know, what are you serious? Or no, he asked that, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I am serious. Why don't we have the materials? I was one of the very few people that really was not afraid to speak out. And especially because this is about Bernie Sanders and I wanted to win so bad. We had to basically make up on, like, my volunteers made up their own flyers because there was just not enough direction from the campaign. Like, you know, what's the difference between conditional and provisional? What do they do? What if they don't get their vote by mail ballot by mail? What do they do? What should they do when they get there? I mean, it was a big black hole of information that we had to make do with till very late on, basically. Towards like 3 or 4 days before election day, then we got like a flyer to make copies of from Jarrell or Rafa, and I think it was Rafa, who wrote something up about what to do. But still, that still did not clarify what's the difference between conditional. Should they be asking for conditional? You know, let's not forget that in LA County, people were voting 11 days prior, 10 days prior. So there were already major instances of issues. And it was shocking to me that the campaign had no clue that was happening, and they were not preparing, neither myself as a field organizer nor so that I can alert my volunteers to alert voters about how to behave and what to do, basically. Months later now, I found out that Lewis and Danny have started a PAC. And so there you go. It's like they're going to continue reaping the benefits of having worked on this campaign. You know, will they be successful in their PAC? I don't know. I don't care. What I do care about, though, is really that they do not exploit Bernie people. They do not, you know, tout that all the work that they did. And I don't care for lip service, because that's what we got all the time on conference calls. Let's give a shout out. Let's lift up this person and that person on these phone calls with each other. It was meaningless to me anyway. Some people need that, and I think it's good. But oftentimes Lewis would just shout out and lift up his higher ups. He would just kiss ass. And so I happened to be on a phone call. This was one of the last phone calls in our group in the California field organization, and Rafa said someone asked, like, what about delegates? Like, don't think that this was actually a talking point or this was on their agenda, because basically one of the Orange County or San Diego field organizers asked about this. What about delegates? And so he said, well, we want, you're going to have to follow, I forgot what the exact words were now, but you cannot disrupt, no protesting, and you basically have to follow commands based on what the campaign, i.e. Bernie Sanders or the campaign, wants. I just want to reiterate now for anybody else watching that Shelley Jackson, Jarrell, they all called us conspiracy theorists. That's just a conspiracy. that we don't need to worry about anything happening on election day because we have lawyers, they'll deal with that. And actually, I believe I sent you a couple of other things towards the bottom there of me. This is after the campaign has ended. I'm no longer paid. Several of us were very concerned about going after more ballots, like if there were any other issues that we could help out with, signatures
ballots.
matching and whatnot. Yeah. And so I reached out to Lewis and I asked him, and he said, "Oh, I'll let you know." I never heard back. I don't know. It just didn't seem like the campaign was interested in going after more ballots. They're not interested in fighting election integrity. It's the same thing that happened last time, honestly, in 2016.